So good morning, good morning, good morning. So I'm switching horses in the middle of the stream. There was an essential point that I wanted to make today, and there was a koan that I wanted to use in the Book of Serenity, and I was all prepared. And I glanced outside as I started to sit, and I saw the snow coming down. And I said, no, this is a day for Layman Pong. And so the koan that I'm going to at least touch upon today is Layman Pong's Good Snowflakes. When Layman Pong took leave of Yaoshan, Shan ordered 10 Chan travelers to escort him to the gate. The layman pointed to the snow in the air and said, "Good snowflakes. They don't fall any other place." At that time, one of the Chan travelers named Chuan said, "Where do they fall?" The layman slapped him once. Chuan said, "Even a layman shouldn't be so coarse." The layman said, "Though you call yourself a Chan traveler this way, the king of death still won't let you go." Chuan said, "How about you, layman?" Again, the layman slapped him and said, "Your eyes see like a blind man, your mouth speaks like a mute." Sueto said, "Besides, when Layman Pong first spoke, I just would have made a snowball and hit him with it." So this is a wonderful koan and a very playful koan. It's always been a favorite to me. So a little context on Layman Pong, who most of you know because I've done this koan before and other things. Pong was an unusual guy, right? I mean, the initial fact being that he was a lay practitioner. He was not a monk at a time when almost all Chan practitioners were monks. But at some point in his life, Pong decided he wanted to pursue the Chan path, the spiritual path. He threw all his worldly possessions into the river. And he and his daughter set off to visit various monasteries and to practice. And I can't think, anybody think of his daughter's name right now? I can't think of her name. But she was a wonderful adept too. And in fact, there's a kind of a little family Dharma combat thing with Pong and his wife and his daughter. And she kind of upsets both, upturns both mom and dad. So they were an extraordinary family. And you know, when there's a whole story around their deaths, when Pong is about to die, he's off with his daughter, and he tells her that he's going to die, and would she do funeral rites for him? And she says, "Yeah, I'll do that." And then she immediately sits down and dies herself. So Pong then has to do her funeral rites and take care of her. And then he now is free. He sits down and dies. When his wife, who's someplace else in China, hears of this, she promptly expires, and their son, the fourth member of the family, follows not far behind. Very extraordinary and somewhat strange family, maybe. But anyway, this is earlier in Pong's life. Obviously, he's on his journey, and so he was received at these monasteries. He was in spite of being a lay person, he was very much an adept, and was received as such in the monasteries, and is being honored here, right? The teacher, I forget who's the teacher in this case, Yaoshan, sends 10 of his students to escort Pong to the gate, right? So that's a little of the context here. And when they get outside, you know, air is crisp and cold, and the flakes are falling down, and Pang points to them and says, "Good snowflakes. They don't fall any other place." So at least part of what this koan is, and I've talked about it recently, so I don't want to repeat myself so much, is about intimacy, about immediacy, about right here, right now. Life is happening. Life is happening right in front of our eyes. The snow is falling. Oh, maybe the snow stopped, but anyway, it has been falling. It's not falling in Arizona and Florida. Has it snowed in Arizona since you've lived there, Gary and Deborah? Yeah. When I came back to Maine to interview for a job, it was the 1st of April. And I came back and I interviewed in 3 places in Skowhegan, Augusta, and Lewiston. And there was no snow in any of those places. Linda was back in Arizona and they had over a foot of snow in Sedona. And she had to pile logs into the back of my pickup so she could drive around town because it was only a 2-wheel drive pickup. Anyway, snow. So, but the reason I got into this whole thing, this week I saw a talk by Brad Warner, and the title caught my eye. His title was something to the is enlightenment necessary? Okay, I thought that hooked me. I'll go see what Brad has to say. And in actuality, Brad and I come to the same conclusion on that question, although we come to it by different paths, different ways. So Brad's conclusion was that enlightenment is not necessary. And I share that perspective. Again, we hold it for different reasons. So Brad was coming from, first of all, there's a very different perspective between Soto and Rinzai. And you probably would never hear a Rinzai teacher say what he and I have just said. But it's probably not that uncommon a view amongst Soto teachers. So very different. If you notice in Soto, we almost never even talk about enlightenment, right? We don't even like the word. I don't like the word. It's been distorted in this culture, right? So enlightenment is this big deal. You can walk on water. You can transform chickens into ducks. I mean, you can do all these wondrous, magical things, right? And it is, of course, not that. So I don't even like that word. And that's why I more often than not only talk about realization, realizing our true nature, something like that, because it's gotten distorted. But in Rinzai, the whole idea of enlightenment is extremely important. And in fact, Rinzai students are pushed. Okay, I mean, I'm going to do another distinction here. They're pushed to have Kensho. Kensho. What is Kensho? Brad said that Kensho is enlightenment. Again, I differ from him on this point. As far as I'm concerned, I mean, Kensho, the experience of Kensho is the fundamental experience of body and what Dogen describes as body and mind falling away. It is a profound experience. It may, depending on how profound it is, it may or may not be transformational. And so to me, that goes to the essential point about Kensho, that Kensho in and of itself is not very significant. What is significant is what is done with that. The repeated practice and the deepening of the Kensho, and ultimately losing that. We talk about in Zen, we must lose every trace of enlightenment. So to me, this is just my perspective. Enlightenment in Zen means that we have gone through that whole process of not just having a Kensho, but of deepening our realization, deepening our understanding, deepening our practice, and ultimately getting rid of it all because we don't cling to anything at all. No clinging, no clinging. Okay. So that said, in Rinzai, there's a tremendous effort to achieve Kensho. And students are pressed early on in retreats, especially. And you've read about this, or maybe you've experienced it, students staying awake all night, sitting on the hillside, mooing in the hope of triggering a Kensho. So this brings up two of the objections that Brad had to the whole idea. The first one being that Kensho is unreliable. It comes when it wants to. We can't determine it. We can't will it. We can't do anything about it. It either comes or it doesn't come in its own time. And that's certainly true. I mean, Brett has a valid point there. I don't know that sort of negates the importance of Kensho, but it certainly is one of its characteristics. It's just unreliable. Now, the second thing that he objected to, and again, it's a realistic objection, but anyway, is that I mentioned, so in Rinzai, they push for this, what I would deem premature realization experience. And there have been some cases, very, very few, of people who had that sort of an unconditioned, unprepared for Kensho, and subsequently had some kind of a mental breakdown. Now that's sort of, A, it's extremely rare, and B, that the stories are anecdotal. And as you probably know, late teens, early 20s is often the time when people experience, who have a predisposition to a psychotic disorder, may have their first psychotic break. So in fact, what may be happening is simply that intensity of practice, staying up all night, and and self-deprivation, and may simply, I think it's possible that it just triggers that first psychotic break. Especially because, although I can say that the experience of body and mind falling away, if you're not a mature practitioner, if you're not prepared, I imagine it can be fairly scary, Well, we all talk about wanting to get away to this ego. When that ego's gone, it's like, whoa, where am I? Who am I? It always comes back, not to worry. Can't get rid of an ego that easily. But that said, so those are his objections. My feeling comes from a totally different perspective, very different perspective, which is just that I'm not sure it's necessary. Why? Our practice is about intimacy. It's about connecting to the world. It's about being less ego-centered. It's about being compassionate. It's about living fully and experiencing, drawing all the juice out of life that we can. And guess what? You can do that without experiencing Kensho. Everyone who practices and practices with sincerity experiences those things. those are my view, and it's probably a very sort of Soto-informed view. Those are the important things. What kind of, I forget who said this. Maybe it was Ram Dass, or, it's always good to quote famous people. But the key, the test for our practice is how we talk to the person checking us out in the grocery store. It's how we raise our children. It's how we relate to our partners. It's how we do our jobs. It's how we interact with the world in terms of social justice. I mean, it's many, many, many aspects to it. And you don't have to have Kensho to engage in that way. Does Kensho help? I'd be lying if I said I don't think that it does. I do think it does. But is it essential? Absolutely not. I agree completely with Brad on that point. I almost feel like it's like heretical for me to say that. But there was a wonderful story years ago. I don't even remember the source of this story. And if any of you ever come across it, please tell me. There was a monk in Japan, and he had been in the monastery for 30 years, more or less. And obviously practicing and living the life of the monastery. And the image I have, and I don't know whether, again, it was something I read or actually a video or something, he is sweeping the courtyard in the monastery. He's there, and he's just doing that with wonderful quality of intention. He's totally involved in removing all the leaves, keeping the courtyard clear, beautiful. And whoever, again, is sort of narrating or telling this story is sort of pitying this guy because he's been in the monastery for 30 years and he's never had Kensho. And I never understood that, and I don't understand that to this day. There he is, he's serene. He's fully engaged and living his life, the life that he wants to live. He's fulfilled. How many human beings can say that? How many human beings have that kind of serenity? And so I don't pity that man. I think he's extremely fortunate. And by the way, the other thing, I mean, again, it's sort of like there's nothing in concrete. There's no, but I think sometimes Kensho happens in a way that's so gradual and so subtle that the person has had the experience, but it didn't knock them over, so they don't even kind of really realize that it's happened. Okay, it may have happened many times. But we focus on the drama, the big show up, body and mind falling away. Yes. And I think that's misplaced focus. The focus should be on the person's life. How are they living? Who are they? And what are they giving to the world? What are they giving to the world? The basic point of our practice is to lessen the hold that this ego has on us. So that we're less and less thinking and behaving from a self-centered or self-protective or selfish perspective, and more open to the needs of others, other humans, and the world around us, the natural world, the beings around us. And I don't see any way that you can do this for practice for a long time and not have that happen, and not have our hearts open, and not have us care more and more about everyone and everything around us. And less be wrapped up in and preoccupied by our own obsessions. Can't do it. You cannot do this practice a long time and not have those things happen if you're practicing with sincerity. And so to some extent, I encourage us all, forget about enlightenment, forget about Kensho. In some ways, it's completely immaterial. And by the way, thinking about it, dwelling on it, trying to have it is like trying to ask lightning to strike your house the next time it's passing by. We can no more control and predict that than we can the lightning. But we can control and predict how we act every day. We can control and predict how we treat others every day. We can control and predict how we relate to this world every day. And man, if we are doing that, we are doing a lot, especially in these times. Look at all the rabbit holes that we can fall in, all the hatred, divisiveness, anger, fear, these terrible things that are ripping the country apart, that are ripping the world apart. And through our practice, we can be part of the cure. We can be seeds of change in our own lives, in our own families, in our own workplaces, in our own supermarkets, wherever we interact. And those good snowflakes are everywhere. They're even in Arizona and Florida. Not so much, but so I will pause there and see what thoughts, questions that you have.
I think I have a small story to share, which I have shared with Peter. And I wrote a couple notes about it, and I think they're right over here. So just a minute. About a month ago, when Gary and Deborah were taking over my duties, I was in the country of Jamaica. And I went there to have a psilocybin experience. And psilocybin is is legal in Jamaica. And it was very controlled. It was guided. It was intended to be a therapeutic or spiritual experience. There were 11 of us there who went through the 3 nights. First day was introduction. Second day was the experience, which was about 5 hours with locally sourced mushrooms. The next day and a half was all integration. And people around me after the experience told about all this bliss and joy, and some cried and brought back old ancestors and relatives. And for me, I was nauseous the whole time. It was, so it was really unpleasant. And while I was going through this, I thought of that morning. And that morning, I had sat, done zazen, and had just an amazing experience with the birds being lined up in front of me. So I felt like they were sitting with me. I had a really deep connection with everything before I went in. And the voice in my head said, why are you doing this instead of doing what you were doing before you took the mushroom? Anyway, after going through the integration process, I realized that that was the point that the mushroom had to teach me, that I already had it and I didn't have to go searching. However, I did notice over the next number of days, I experienced the ability to really make a deep connection. And we flew through Charlotte so that we could get there early in the day and leave late in the day from Jamaica. So we were on our way back home. We were in the Charlotte airport, and I was sitting there having breakfast and had this just very wonderful euphoric feeling come over me. And then we went to the airport, and as I sat there waiting for the plane, I just started writing and writing and writing and writing everything that came to my mind, and especially my experience in Charlotte, which is, so I have 24 pages that I wrote, most of it, but this was my reflection afterwards, saying the retreat brought me a profoundly deep connection to the earth and the people I was with. The people were very, very much involved with the deepening that I felt connection. And excuse me for using the enlightenment word, but I think you'll understand the way I'm using it. So this was something that I wrote when I was waiting for the airplane to come home. Yes, I achieved enlightenment, and it is just this, just the mist hugging the majestic lineup of red-brown trees outside the doorway where I wait for the shuttle outside of the Hilton Garden Inn. I didn't expect enlightenment at the Hilton Garden Inn. I expected soaring through the universe, atomizing into the realm around me, one with everything, like consciousness dissolving into universal consciousness. But it was the misty trees standing where they were planted, lined up like sentries outside the Hilton Garden Inn. They were just this, grounded into the earth, presumably with fungi helping them connect in whatever they needed in order to flourish outside the Hilton Garden Inn.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Susan.
Hey.
Thank you for that. It's beautiful. So it also calls to me, I think I need to talk a little bit about psychedelics at this particular juncture. Psychedelics and Zen. I will acknowledge a couple of prejudices that I have. One of which is that I see myself as a person in recovery, and I haven't used alcohol and drugs or drugs of any form in 27 years. So that's certainly one part of how I relate to this subject. And the second is, some of you know that I studied, when I lived with Arizona, studied with a couple of indigenous American teachers. And they were kind of aligned with the pan-Indian spiritual movement that in the West, that's Lakota chiefs are particularly influential leaders of that, the elders. And they do not do any alcohol or drugs. They are very opposed to it for spiritual purposes. And I think there's probably numerous reasons for that, among which the terrible damage that alcohol and drugs have done in Indian country, but also because the ceremonies and things are designed, one of the things that probably is true of many spiritual traditions, if not all, is the changing of our consciousness. And the ceremonies and the drumming and the things that happen in many indigenous American ceremonies are intended to do that. And fasting and vision questing and so on. Anyway, so there's the part of me that also has that feeling that a substance, any substance, is an artificial way of achieving something that should be achieved through spiritual means. That's sort of, and my third prejudice is from my own experience with psychedelics. And as I'm fond of saying, before I took the psychedelics, I was an asshole. And after I took them, I was still an asshole. It had no particular trend. It was like, oh, cool, but it was not particularly transformative in any lasting way. Now, that said, there are people doing things today differently, the way Susan talked about it. There's lots of, there are psychologists, there are people from various indigenous traditions and so on that are kind of taking this maybe to a new level or a different place. And I can't comment on that because those aren't things I have experienced. What I can say is this. Deborah, do you remember Nick? You're probably the only person here who remembers Nick. I don't know, Gary and Deborah, whether you ever met Nick. No. Nick was a friend of mine and a student at Treetop intermittently, because his life was pretty crazy and he was all over the country. But for those who didn't know, Nick was a drug addict. And I mean, Nick was a drug addict. and it eventually took his life. He died, I don't know, now, half a dozen years ago of a heroin overdose. But one of the things I once said to Nick is that I have had deeper experiences on the cushions than I ever had with any drug. And that that really made an impression to him. I'd often hear people saying, Peter said that he had deeper experiences on the cushion, but it's true. It's here. It's available, and I believe that it's sort of lasting and resilient. It's not a transitory experience. It's the experiences that we have on the cushion are truly transformational. So feel free to do with that what you will. I don't know. At the end of my life, might I choose to microdose with psilocybin? I might. That's the other thing is, what there are these extraordinary circumstances, severe pain and terminal illness. Will probably visit us all at some point. At least one of those will definitely visit us all. And the other, highly likely. One of the downsides to living longer is that there's more likelihood that we're going to eventually develop some kind of very painful, chronic, and ultimately fatal illness. So, you know, Dido used to talk about Dido Roshi used to say, you know, he was very stern, and he used to say, "You're wiggling now. You think you have pain. Well, one of these days you're going to have cancer and you're going to really have pain, you know, so deal with it." You know, and it was, oh. Of course, poor Dido, of course, died of lung cancer. And I honestly don't know. I don't know, but I suspect he took the pain meds at the end of his life. You know, and it's something we all want to avoid. I don't want to take pain meds, mainly because I want to be conscious to the end. And as you probably know, once you know, as the morphine stops working, you got to take more and more, and eventually it just puts you to sleep or kills you. And anyway, I want to have a conscious death. So I don't know. I'm going to be interested in in those options, but I'm not interested in them today. I don't need them today, because Zen has given me everything I need in that respect. So I just put that out to you, and I think that in essence, that's where Susan went with it. You know, kind of that it just, in some extent, reminded her of what she already had and continues to have. Okay, now I'll shut up again.
Well, Susan, I don't know what to say, or I don't know how to articulate how much I love that story. There's something about enlightenment at the Hilton Garden Inn, the sort of pedestrian nature of that I think underscores what we're doing, or at least how I understand what we're doing. In previous iterations of practicing Buddhism, enlightenment was this, you know, like I think sort of what you were alluding to, this cosmic collision that I really, really wanted, but thought I probably wasn't really ever going to get, or wasn't worthy of getting. And so I switched over here, and I understand the workaday nature of it, and I really value that. And I value this conversation that, you know, maybe it'll never happen, but what happens when you push the boulder up the mountain every day is really what counts. So I don't know, that just the enlightenment at the Hilton Garden Inn really dovetailed really beautifully with that.
But we shouldn't tell them that, or they'll start charging extra. Do you want the room, sir, or the room with enlightenment?
And it was the one out by the airport. And what I was out looking at that was just so wonderful was an office park. And, you know, they'd planted some trees and there was a phony lake in the middle, but it was all I needed. I don't want to go on too long, but as I was at the airport waiting to get on the plane and writing, and I went to the restroom and I looked at the metal stall around me, and it was sort of perforated, and I just really looked at it, and I saw all these mosaics and light, and then I'm getting on the plane, and there's a young man in front of me, and he has shiny brown hair, and I look and I see his cowlick, and it's in this swirl, and it's the same swirl that you see the orbits of planets. And I think all I was doing was just really looking closely. I mean, I was not hallucinating. This had been a few days after. I was just looking so closely and seeing things that were always there that I'd never seen before.
That you mentioned the swirling hair. I came across an article this week from the Resonance Science Foundation that if folks are familiar with morphogenic fields, some physicists have now come up with something that I can't comprehend, theorem that explains morphogenic fields, confirms that they exist, and it ties into all those helixes and double helixes from seashells up to galaxies, and why things form the way they do and swirl the way they do and all that. Very fascinating. We're really learning so much wonderful new stuff about this universe that we thought we knew everything about. Okay, that said, shall we say Agata?
Susan, you're muted.
Thank you. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.
So thank you, everyone. Interestingly enough, in that I just...
Oops, you're muted, Peter.
No. In the article on morphogenic fields, one of the things they mentioned was snowflakes. So there, everything is truly connected. And I'm going to now go visit a few billion of them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.